The journey into the frozen frontier began not with a sudden revelation, but with a gradual, almost imperceptible shift in the landscape. Travelers and early settlers alike would notice first the subtle change in the air, the way it pressed lightly against their skin, carrying a crispness that seemed to sharpen thought itself. Each breath became visible, a thin cloud rising and vanishing, marking the rhythm of the body in a world that demanded attention to the simplest acts. The temperature was no longer merely a background presence. It was a force, gentle yet insistent, shaping movement, dictating the pace of footsteps and framing the consciousness of anyone who dared to enter these remote lands. Snow, the quiet signature of the frozen frontier, began to appear in small amounts at first. Flakes drifted lazily from low-hanging clouds, each one delicate and unique, catching the dim light of the low sun before settling on cloaks, hats, and the rough surfaces of stones and trees. There was a hush to this falling snow, a muffling of ordinary sound, so that even the rush of distant rivers seemed subdued, drawn into a softer cadence. Travelers would pause often, letting their senses adjust, noticing the way the forest floor seemed to absorb sound, how the air smelled faintly of ice and resin, and how even the faintest movement, footstep, branch scraping, or the tremor of wind, felt amplified in the vast, still expanse. The terrain itself transformed gradually, presenting subtle but unmistakable markers of the cold's dominion. Rivers thickened at their edges, small rivulets of ice forming where the current slowed. Trees, their limbs bare or dusted with frost, seemed to lean slightly under an invisible weight. Rocks glistened as frost settled into every crevice, and the soil became dense and unyielding beneath boots and paws alike. Observing these signs required patience. One could not simply charge forward. The land demanded careful attention, a slow negotiation with the elements that would govern life for months, perhaps years to come. Early settlers approached this new world with a mix of awe and caution. They learned quickly that the first impression of the cold was deceptive. It could charm with the sparkling clarity of morning frost, and yet it could betray with the silent cruelty of wind that crept through gaps in clothing and shelter. Each step forward was measured. There was an almost ceremonial rhythm to their movement. Pause, feel, adjust, and proceed. The sound of snow compressing under boots provided a constant reminder that the land, though silent, was alive, listening, shifting, reminding the traveler that survival here depended on attentiveness and restraint. The light itself played a quiet role in shaping perception. In winter months, the sun lingered low on the horizon, casting long, delicate shadows across the snow and ice. The world appeared flattened and distant in this gentle illumination, as if the land had been painted in pale blues, grays, and whites. Every contour, from the gentle rise of a hill to the dip of a frozen creek, became more pronounced, yet softened by the diffuse glow. Traveling during these hours required a stillness of mind. Sudden movements seemed out of place, incongruous against the quiet majesty of this liminal landscape. Even the passing clouds, slow and heavy, dictated the rhythm of observation, marking time in the absence of conventional clocks. For those who lingered, the sounds of life in the frontier emerged subtly. The distant cracking of ice under pressure, the faint rustle of branches burdened by frost, and the occasional call of a bird or the snap of a small animal moving beneath snow became vital indicators of presence and danger. The earliest inhabitants learned to interpret these sounds with care. A sudden crack might indicate a shifting snowbank, while a faint rustle could mean prey or a predator was nearby. Listening became as important as seeing. In a land where visibility was often obscured by drifting snow or low light, the ears guided the feet, and silence was a form of intelligence. Emotional impressions were as sharp as the cold itself. The first arrival often brought a profound sense of solitude, a slow recognition of isolation in a land that appeared vast beyond comprehension. Yet within this solitude, there was also a quiet fascination, a curiosity nurtured by the subtle interplay of light, shadow, sound, and cold. Each day spent in this environment encouraged a deep inward reflection. Travelers became aware of the small details, the curve of a tree branch under frost, the way a footprint compressed snow, the patterns left by wind over frozen water. These details, though minute, offered connection to the land, a reminder that observation was a bridge between survival and understanding. The human body responded instinctively to the encroaching cold. Hands and feet stiffened first, drawing attention to themselves in ways that demanded immediate care. Each inhalation sent a sharp pulse of chill through the lungs, awakening alertness. Muscles tightened, movement slowed, and even the heartbeat seemed to adjust to the deliberate rhythm of this environment. Early settlers learned to move deliberately, recognizing that haste could bring injury or exhaustion, while careful, measured activity conserved strength. Life in the frontier required harmony with the land. The slightest impatience could tip the balance toward peril. Finally, there was the intangible sensation of being on the threshold of a new world. Arrival at the frozen frontier was not merely a matter of geography, but of perception and spirit. Time seemed to stretch. Moments lingered longer than in familiar climates, allowing for reflection and deepening awareness. The cold was both adversary and teacher, its presence felt in every movement, every breath, and every decision. And as settlers or travelers stood, looking across the expanse of snow and ice, they felt the first taste of a profound truth. Life here would unfold slowly, deliberately, and entirely on the terms dictated by the land itself. It was in this first contact, the quiet observations, the careful steps, the acute awareness of wind, light, and snow, that the foundations of life in frozen frontier communities were laid. Every day would begin here, at this boundary where the warmth of the known world ended, and the slow, attentive rhythm of cold survival began. Here, one learned to notice, to wait, and to breathe, all the while recognizing that this vast, white silence demanded respect, humility, and patience in equal measure. In this way, the first arrival was never merely an entry into new land. It was the initial lesson in how to inhabit a world that moved slowly, deeply, and entirely on its own quiet terms. Settlers who arrived at the frozen frontier quickly realized that survival depended not only on resilience, but on the careful selection of a place to call home. The land, though seemingly uniform under its blanket of snow, offered subtle clues, telltale signs in the tilt of a slope, the clustering of trees, the faint sound of running water beneath ice. Each choice was deliberate, slow, and guided by instinct refined over years of observation. To select a dwelling place was to listen to the land, to read it in silence, and to respect its quiet authority. A hasty decision could bring exposure to wind, avalanches, or the caprices of winter rivers. A patient one promised shelter, warmth, and the possibility of continuity. The process began with observation. Settlers would walk slowly across the terrain, feet crunching on hardened snow, eyes scanning for patterns and irregularities. The wind itself offered counsel. On exposed ridges, it howled and bit with relentless insistence. In sheltered valleys or behind natural formations, it moved with gentler pressure, curling around stones or trees. Choosing a location often meant finding such hidden pockets, places where the land itself provided natural barriers against the elements. Every gust was noted, every echo in the frozen silence studied, for it revealed the character of the place in ways that measurement or maps could not. Water, the essential lifeline, demanded attention as well. Rivers, streams, and small pools, when they appeared, were rarely predictable. Some ran beneath thick layers of ice, their currents muted but forceful, while others slowed to near stillness, fragile sheets of frost reflecting the pale sun. Settlers learned to discern which sources would sustain them through the winter and which were treacherous. Too close and a river might flood during thaw, too distant, and the effort of carrying water through snowdrifts risked exhaustion. Careful listening, of the whisper of water beneath ice, of the shifting of snow along its banks, guided each step toward permanence. The land surface offered further guidance. Stones and earth hinted at stability or the lack of it. A seemingly flat patch might conceal frozen bogs or soft patches that would collapse under weight. Trees, too, provided information. Conifers, resilient and wind-shaped, indicated enduring soil, while bare deciduous clusters suggested exposure to storms. Settlers moved slowly among these markers, feeling the give of snow and earth beneath their boots, testing the firmness of every step, their senses finely attuned to small vibrations in the ground. The quiet act of walking became a dialogue with the land, each motion yielding lessons about where it would be safest to stay. Sunlight, sparse in these regions during long winters, also dictated placement. Low angles created shadows that shifted slowly across the snow, revealing hidden dips and ridges, but also offering the warmth of light where it could be captured. Homes were often situated to face the rising sun, drawing light and heat into their interiors during brief daylight hours. Even small variations in elevation mattered. A gentle slope could catch the sun longer, while depressions might collect frost and block light entirely. Settlers learned patience, waiting for hours to see how shadows and light interacted with the land before deciding where to settle permanently. Observation extended beyond the immediate landscape. The presence of wildlife offered subtle indications of safety and abundance. Tracks in snow told stories: the cautious route of a deer, the abrupt turn of a hare, the faint, ominous scratch of a predator. Each imprint suggested where life could thrive and where danger lurked. Settlers would follow these signs carefully, noting patterns, learning which areas were favorable for hunting or foraging, and which were best avoided. Every trace became part of the map in their minds, a mental chart built slowly over days and weeks of walking and watching. Once a general area was chosen, the act of establishing a dwelling was undertaken with meticulous attention to microclimates and natural protection. Rocks, trees, and even snowdrifts were used as shields against biting winds. Earth itself, sometimes reinforced with timber or stone, formed walls that retained heat and deflected storms. The construction process was deliberately slow, a dialogue between human intention and the suggestions of the land. Each layer of shelter was tested against frost, snow, and wind. Each adjustment was made with care, ensuring that the home could endure the rigors of winter. This deliberate pace, while frustrating to those accustomed to speed, was a lesson in humility and necessity. Settlers also took the long view, considering the cyclical patterns of snow, ice, and sunlight. They observed where drifts gathered during storms, where ice might crack and shift, and where spring thaw would concentrate water. Choosing a place to remain was never a matter of convenience. It was an investment in endurance, in understanding the land's rhythms and working with them. Settlers often returned to the same spots at different times of day and in different weather, verifying that what appeared safe under calm conditions would also withstand the fury of a storm. Each observation reinforced the understanding that the frozen frontier was alive in its own quiet, unhurried way. Emotionally, the selection of a dwelling carried weight. Settlers experienced a blend of anticipation and unease, the tension between relief at finding shelter and the knowledge that permanence here required constant vigilance. Every footprint and every handprint in the snow was a commitment, a pledge to live in a world that offered no indulgence. The cold tested patience, demanding a quiet focus that could not be rushed. Those who succeeded developed an intimate awareness of the land, a sense of attunement that allowed them to move, breathe, and live almost invisibly within it. By the time the site was chosen, the land had revealed its character, where it could nurture, where it could punish, and where, with care, humans could endure. Settlers began to feel a tentative kinship with the terrain, a recognition that survival depended on listening as much as acting. Every decision, from the placement of a hearth to the orientation of a door, reflected a dialogue with the environment, a patient negotiation with forces larger and slower than themselves. This attentiveness marked the first step toward a life that was slow, deliberate, and profoundly connected to the rhythms of ice, snow, and cold wind. Choosing a place to remain was thus far more than a practical act. It was a meditation, a careful study of detail, a commitment to patience and observation. In this act, settlers learned to move slowly, to weigh each choice, and to inhabit the land with humility. Here, at the edge of permanence and exposure, they laid the foundation for everything that would follow: the slow unfolding of daily life, the rituals of survival, and the quiet, enduring rhythm of existence in frozen frontier communities. The construction of a home in the frozen frontier was not a hurried affair. It began with a measured examination of the chosen site, each rock, slope, and patch of snow considered for its potential to shield and sustain. Settlers approached the task with a careful mindfulness, knowing that every stone placed and every beam set would determine the difference between comfort and exposure, between warmth and relentless cold. Hands, often numb from the icy wind, moved deliberately. Eyes squinted against drifting snow to judge angles and distances. Breath, visible in the frigid air, marked the rhythm of labor in a world that demanded patience above all. The first steps were simple yet critical: clearing the ground, reinforcing it, and establishing a footprint for the shelter. Snow was moved with shovels, spades, and sometimes bare hands, packed down to create a firm base. Stones were gathered from nearby outcroppings, tested for stability, and arranged with care. Even the smallest error, a poorly placed rock, a slanted log, could compromise the home against the wind's unrelenting push. Settlers often paused to examine their progress, crouching low, brushing frost from surfaces, ensuring that the structure, though humble, adhered to the lessons the land had imparted in the slow days of observation. Timber and wood became extensions of the human body, shaped by hands accustomed to the cold. Axes bit slowly into frozen wood, sending soft clouds of sawdust into the air, mingling with the mist of breath. Each log was fitted with care, angled to shed snow, interlocked to trap warmth, and anchored against the pressure of wind. The repetitive rhythm of lifting, placing, and securing became meditative. The body moved in harmony with the work: a bend, a pause, a test of weight, a careful adjustment. The sound of timber settling into place was faint yet satisfying, echoing slightly against the quiet expanse, a confirmation that progress was being made despite the vast, indifferent cold beyond the walls. Earth and turf were employed wherever possible, layered to create insulation and stability. Settlers dug into frozen ground, extracting soil and sod in small, deliberate clumps. Each piece was carefully positioned, pressed against walls, and layered in ways that would trap heat while resisting frost. Fingers became chapped, hands stiffened, and tools required constant maintenance, yet the work continued with a slow, rhythmic patience that mirrored the frozen rhythm of the land itself. There was an intimate awareness in every motion: the weight of each turf, the angle of each layer, the subtle interplay between structure and environment. Inside the nascent home, the hearth assumed a central role, both practical and symbolic. Stones were arranged to contain firewood and sparks, chosen for density and durability, and the surrounding area cleared of snow and ice. Even in the earliest stages, the promise of warmth shaped decisions. Walls built slightly closer, roofs angled to conserve heat, openings designed to let in light while shielding against gusts. Settlers moved as though in dialogue with the hearth, testing drafts, adjusting beams, and quietly noting how air and heat traveled through the partially completed structure. Each decision was a reflection of observation and experience, an effort to anticipate the challenges of the long winter months ahead. Construction was never solitary. Families or small groups labored together, each member performing distinct yet complementary tasks. While one tended the timber, another carried stones or pressed earth into place. Silence often prevailed, broken only by the occasional grunt of exertion, the faint scrape of wood, or the soft thump of stone settling into snow-packed ground. The cold encouraged quiet collaboration. Voices carried too far in the open air, and unnecessary movement risked exhaustion. Instead, gestures, glances, and subtle cues conveyed coordination. The community became a living mechanism, each action slow, deliberate, and synchronized with the rhythm of labor and environment. As the walls rose and the roof took shape, the interplay between structure and wind became apparent. Gusts tested every joint, every interlocking beam. Snow settled in drifts along walls, compressing and shifting, reminding builders of the ongoing dialogue with the land. No structure was permanent immediately. Each storm revealed weaknesses that required patient repair and adjustment. Settlers learned to anticipate these subtle pressures, reinforcing walls, adjusting angles, and layering materials to ensure resilience. The process was iterative, a quiet education in both endurance and humility, teaching that survival required constant vigilance and adaptation. The sensory experience of building was profound. The cold pressed against cheeks, fingers grew stiff, and the air itself seemed to resist movement. Yet within the shelter, warmth began to accumulate slowly, radiating from the first flickers of fire, caught by insulated walls and compacted earth. The smell of wood smoke mingled with the crisp tang of snow, creating an atmosphere both protective and intimate. Builders paused often to breathe, feeling the contrast between the harsh exterior and the small haven emerging beneath their hands. Each moment reinforced the understanding that this home was more than timber and stone. It was a buffer against the vast, indifferent cold, a sanctuary shaped by patience and careful observation. Emotionally, building a shelter became a meditation. The repetition of motion, the steady accumulation of walls, and the quiet cooperation of community instilled a sense of calm accomplishment. There was a gentle pride in each completed layer, each secured beam, each patch of earth pressed firmly into place. Yet humility remained. The land was powerful, and no human effort could entirely conquer it. Builders moved with respect, recognizing that endurance depended not on mastery, but on careful negotiation with forces larger than themselves. The shelter was not merely functional. It was a testament to patience, foresight, and the slow, deliberate rhythm of life on the frozen frontier. By the time the basic structure was complete, settlers had already learned the essential lessons of adaptation. Every stone, log, and turf reflected knowledge accumulated in long hours of observation, every choice shaped by the dialogue between human intention and environmental demands. The home stood not as a triumph over the cold, but as a careful compromise, a living structure attuned to wind, snow, and frost, capable of sustaining life in the most challenging of climates. Within its walls, warmth could be captured, movement preserved, and time measured by the slow dance of light and shadow across compacted snow. This deliberate creation of shelter marked the first deep step into the life of a frozen frontier community, setting the stage for every small, mindful action that would follow in the rhythm of survival. Life in the frozen frontier demanded a quiet attentiveness that extended far beyond the construction of shelter or the gathering of supplies. Every inhabitant quickly discovered that the cold was more than a physical presence. It was a language, subtle and complex, spoken in wind, snow, ice, and silence. To thrive here required learning to interpret its vocabulary. The sharp bite of frost, the moan of wind through timber, the shifting patterns of snow across the land. Each sound, each sensation, each shadow was a sentence in a narrative that conveyed caution, opportunity, and the rhythms of survival. Understanding this language became the foundation of all life, shaping movement, thought, and even the passage of time. The first lessons were learned in observation. Settlers noticed that wind could communicate more than mere temperature. A sudden stiffening of the breeze hinted at an approaching storm. A quiet, insistent gust along a ridge suggested subtle changes in weather patterns. The direction of the wind, the way it swirled around natural features, and the sounds it produced all became meaningful. Every rustle of branches, every whistle through rock formations, was studied and remembered, forming a mental map of danger and opportunity. In this world, knowledge of the wind meant life and ignorance carried risk. Snow itself was a storyteller. Its texture, its drift, and its accumulation conveyed information that could not be gleaned from sight alone. Settlers learned to recognize the difference between fresh powder, which might conceal treacherous ice or weak snow bridges, and dense, compacted snow that could bear weight. The pattern of snowdrifts revealed prevailing winds, areas of exposure, and sheltered hollows suitable for temporary refuge. Even the way footprints faded or deepened over hours offered insight into the changing conditions of the land. Reading snow became a daily ritual, a meditation in which patience, stillness, and acute perception were paramount. Temperature, too, communicated quietly. A change in the sharpness of the air against skin signaled shifts in weather or approaching frost events. The feel of ice underfoot, the resistance of frozen earth to a step, or the condensation of breath upon inhalation carried subtle warnings that required constant attention. Over time, settlers internalized these cues, responding almost instinctively to shifts that might otherwise go unnoticed. The body became both instrument and interpreter, sensing threats and opportunities before they were visible, attuning itself to a tempo dictated by frost, wind, and snow. Light served as another dialect of this language. The low winter sun cast elongated shadows that crept slowly across snow and ice, revealing hidden contours and subtle shifts in the terrain. Settlers learned to measure time, judge distances, and anticipate the position of celestial bodies by the movement of shadows and the reflection of light upon frozen surfaces. Clouds, too, offered communication, their slow drift across the horizon signaling shifts in weather, the approach of storms, or the arrival of calm days. Attentive observation of light allowed inhabitants to synchronize their actions with nature's pace, making them participants rather than adversaries in the environment's rhythm. The sounds of the frozen frontier were equally rich with meaning. Ice cracking across a distant river or the groan of frost-expanding timber could indicate movement, danger, or change. Animals, too, communicated their presence and intentions. The cautious scraping of a hair under snow, the distant call of a bird, or the heavy, deliberate tracks of a predator. Settlers learned to distinguish these sounds with care, interpreting each variation and nuance as a message in the ongoing dialogue with the land. In the absence of human conversation, these natural cues became a vital part of community awareness and personal safety. Internalizing this language also demanded psychological adjustment. The cold was relentless, often speaking in tones that were stark and unforgiving. Inhabitants learned to slow their movements, to conserve energy, and to respond deliberately rather than hastily. Patience became a survival skill, and attentiveness a form of discipline. Even small errors, misreading a drift, underestimating the chill, or ignoring the subtle message of an approaching storm, could have consequences. Over time, this constant dialogue with the environment shaped not only behavior but thought, encouraging mindfulness, caution, and a quiet attentiveness that became second nature. Daily routines became entwined with this language. Settlers began to anticipate how frost would form on doorways, how snow would drift around hearths, and how ice might form and melt in patterns dictated by wind and sun. Every task, fetching water, collecting firewood, or tending a shelter, was guided by observations of subtle cues. Each movement was tempered by experience, each action measured to align with the rhythms of the land. In this way, life became an ongoing conversation, one in which listening, watching, and waiting were just as important as action. Emotionally, learning the language of the cold created both humility and intimacy. Humility, because the environment was vast and indifferent, its messages subtle and precise, requiring deep respect and attentiveness. Intimacy, because in learning these signals, settlers became deeply attuned to the world around them, connected in ways impossible in more temperate landscapes. The snow, wind, ice, and shadows ceased to be obstacles and instead became companions, communicating constantly, shaping daily life and guiding choices in ways both subtle and profound. By mastering this language, Settlers could anticipate danger, seize opportunities, and live in harmony with the frozen frontier. Survival depended on this intimate understanding, but life flourished through it as well. Tasks became less burdensome, journeys across snowfields more manageable, and nights in the shelter more secure. The environment, once alien and threatening, gradually became a teacher, offering lessons in patience, perception, and the profound power of quiet observation. In this deliberate, meditative engagement, humans were invited not to conquer the land but to dwell within it, moving slowly, listening intently, and learning to inhabit the frozen world with care, awareness, and humility. In the frozen frontier, the act of securing sustenance was more than a matter of appetite. It was a slow, deliberate process in which every movement, every choice, carried profound significance. The cold did not merely chill the body, it shaped the mind, instilling patience, attentiveness, and restraint. Hunting, fishing, and gathering became rituals, each step measured against the rhythm of the land and the subtle signs that whispered the presence of life. In this world, food was never abundant. It was precious, earned through observation, endurance, and intimate knowledge of the environment. Settlers learned first to read the tracks of animals in the snow. A faint indentation might reveal the cautious path of a hare, the careful tread of a deer, or the silent stalking of a predator. Footprints, subtly altered by wind or drifting snow, were studied closely, their direction, depth, and spacing providing crucial information. Hunters would pause for long minutes, tracing the traces of life, feeling the cold air against their faces, and listening for the faintest rustle. Movement was slow and deliberate. Haste could scatter game or lead to exhaustion. Each step was part of a conversation with the environment, an acknowledgement of its authority and fragility. Fishing in frozen waters demanded a patience that mirrored the landscape itself. Settlers would carve holes into ice, their tools scraping against frost-hardened surfaces, and then wait, sometimes for hours, for the bite that signaled life below. The cold penetrated fingers and toes alike, and breath hung visibly in the air, rising and dissipating in rhythm with the body's quiet anticipation. Silence was essential. Every noise traveled far across the frozen surface. Patience became the measure of skill, and the smallest movement or sound could make the difference between nourishment and emptiness. Success was celebrated quietly, a moment of connection with both the land and its creatures. Gathering edible plants, roots, and berries, when they could be found beneath snow or ice, required careful observation of microclimates and terrain. Small depressions that caught sunlight, gentle slopes that drained water, or sheltered pockets under rocks and trees could harbor life even in the harshest winter months. Hands probed gently, brushing aside frost and ice, testing the resilience of hidden vegetation. Each piece collected was treated with care, waste was avoided, and excess was shared with family and neighbors. Every morsel carried weight not only in calories, but in the awareness of the fragile balance between human need and the endurance of the land. Preparation of food was similarly deliberate. Meat, when secured, was skinned, cut, and preserved slowly, often using salt, smoke, or drying techniques refined over generations. Fires were tended carefully, the heat controlled to prevent scorching, while the aroma of cooking mixed with the cold air in a subtle, comforting haze. Settlers moved with quiet efficiency, aware of the need to conserve energy and warmth. Meals were communal yet restrained, shared silently or with minimal speech, each bite appreciated fully for the sustenance it provided. Eating became a meditation, a ritual of acknowledgement for the effort, patience, and attentiveness that brought nourishment to the table. Scarcity of food also shaped social dynamics. Sharing became essential. Small stores or successful hunts were rarely hoarded. Instead, food was distributed thoughtfully, ensuring that each member of the community, from the youngest child to the eldest elder, received enough to endure the next day. Observing these exchanges, settlers noted subtle cues, gestures, glances, or the careful division of portions that reflected respect, gratitude, and the recognition of dependence on both community and land. In a world where hunger could not be taken lightly, every act of sharing carried significance, reinforcing bonds and sustaining morale. Emotionally, the gathering of food instilled both respect and humility. Respect for the creatures that provided sustenance, for the earth that concealed it, and for the skill required to acquire it. Humility in recognizing that success was never guaranteed. Even the most careful tracking, the most patient fishing, or the most attentive foraging could yield nothing. These quiet lessons were absorbed slowly, shaping character as surely as diet shaped the body. Settlers learned to move deliberately, observe continuously, and act only when the moment demanded, cultivating a rhythm that aligned human effort with the frozen landscape's subtle timing. Food scarcity also brought reflection. Settlers would consider the changing seasons, noting how certain resources appeared or disappeared with the movement of light, the thickness of snow, or the shifting of ice. They learned to plan days and weeks in advance, preserving stores, rationing carefully, and preparing for the unpredictability of the environment. This slow, deliberate approach encouraged mindfulness, transforming what might otherwise be a mere struggle for survival into a measured engagement with the natural world. Through these practices, the act of gathering food became intertwined with the rhythms of the frontier itself. Each day's work was a meditation on observation, patience, and respect. The cold, which could have been seen solely as an adversary, instead became a teacher, guiding hands, sharpening senses, and shaping the pace of life. Settlers who mastered this slow dance with scarcity did more than survive. They lived deliberately, aware of every breath, every movement, and every gift of nourishment provided by the land, the creatures, and the enduring winter. In the frozen frontier, sustenance was not merely consumed. It was recognized, honored, and integrated into the slow unfolding of life. Every meal, every preserved root, every carefully carved fish spoke of endurance, attentiveness, and quiet celebration. In this world of restraint and patience, food became more than fuel. It was the medium through which humans connected with the land, each other, and the subtle, unyielding rhythms of the cold. It was through these daily acts of care and attentiveness that the foundations of survival and community were cemented, quietly but irreversibly, in the frozen silence of the frontier. In the frozen frontier, life was measured not by clocks or calendars, but by the slow, inexorable rhythm of light and darkness. Days arrived cautiously, stretching pale fingers of weak sun across the snow, lingering only briefly before retreating to the distant horizon. Nights, long and enveloping, pressed against the land with quiet authority, drawing shadows across frozen rivers and forests. Settlers soon understood that their existence would be defined by this slow, deliberate dance of day and night, and that to live in harmony with it required patience, observation, and acceptance of the land's immutable cycles. Morning emerged gradually, often unnoticed at first, as a subtle change in the hue of snow and ice. A faint glow behind distant hills, a softening of shadows, the whisper of wind carrying an almost imperceptible warmth. These signs indicated the beginning of a new day. Settlers rose slowly, their bodies adjusting to both temperature and light. Hands stiff from sleep were warmed by breath and movement, and the simple act of standing became a conscious negotiation with fatigue and cold. Each day began as an exercise in awareness, a recognition that life unfolded one deliberate step at a time in a world that demanded attentiveness. The low sun, when it appeared, cast elongated shadows that crept across frozen surfaces. Its pale light created a landscape of soft blues and silvers, revealing contours previously hidden in shadow. Travelers and settlers would pause frequently, observing these subtle shifts, noting the way ice glinted differently, how snowdrifts accumulated in response to wind patterns, or how the edges of a forest caught light in unexpected ways. Even a brief moment of brightness was significant, offering warmth and guidance, a temporary reprieve from the dominance of cold and shadow. Days were experienced slowly, in small increments, as the body and mind adjusted to their fleeting presence. Labor was synchronized with these rhythms. Tasks such as chopping wood, fetching water, or tending fires were undertaken when light allowed, often in deliberate silence. Movement was measured. Haste risked missteps, injury, or wasted effort. Settlers learned to extend the usefulness of each faint hour of sunlight, performing actions with care and mindfulness, aware that energy was precious and that the cold would claim strength with every exertion. The slow, repetitive work became almost meditative, reinforcing the rhythm of life dictated by light and shadow. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, a transition began that was as subtle as it was profound. Twilight in the frozen frontier was not a sudden darkness, but a gentle shading of the world, a slow deepening of blue and gray across snow and ice. Shadows merged, the outline of trees softened, and the frozen rivers became reflective mirrors of a sky fading into night. Settlers adjusted their activities, slowing movement, conserving energy, and preparing for the hours when light would no longer guide or sustain them. This quiet adjustment was not merely practical, it was psychological, a preparation for the immersion into a world where darkness dominated. Night descended fully, bringing with it a stillness that enveloped the land. In the absence of sun, all sounds were amplified: the soft crack of ice under pressure, the distant groan of wind through timber, the subtle movement of snow on drifts. Settlers moved cautiously within and around their shelters, guided by memory, touch, and faint starlight. Time seemed to stretch, each hour elongated in the cold and silence. Sleep, when it came, was carefully managed, a necessary respite in a world where darkness and temperature dictated the pace of life as much as human effort. Social interactions were similarly shaped by the rhythm of light and darkness. Conversations, shared meals, and collective labor were organized around the brief daylight hours. As night fell, communities withdrew into the shelter of their homes, gathering quietly around fires, sharing warmth, and exchanging knowledge in hushed tones. The long nights encouraged reflection, storytelling, and observation of the subtle shifts in temperature and light within the shelter itself. These routines created a sense of continuity, linking each day to the next in a rhythm both predictable and intimate. The body, attuned to these extremes, developed its own internal clock. Settlers learned to conserve energy during prolonged darkness, to engage fully during fleeting daylight, and to synchronize rest, work, and observation with the land's cycles. Every action, from tending fires to mending clothing, was timed in accordance with the natural passage of light and dark. Even leisure and contemplation were framed by this rhythm, as settlers moved deliberately, embracing the slow, meditative pace imposed by the environment. Emotionally, the interplay of short days and long nights shaped perception and mood. The brief sunlight inspired quiet gratitude and careful attention. The extended darkness fostered introspection, patience, and a heightened awareness of both vulnerability and endurance. Settlers learned to find comfort in small details: a flickering flame, the soft crunch of snow underfoot, or the warmth of shared presence within the shelter. These modest anchors allowed life to unfold with stability, even as the land pressed insistently with its cold and shadow. Through these cycles, settlers internalized the rhythm of the frozen frontier. Time became tangible not through clocks or dates, but through the movement of light, the duration of shadow, and the subtle changes in wind, snow, and temperature. Each day was lived deliberately, each night accepted as part of a larger cadence. By attuning themselves to this rhythm, inhabitants of the frontier developed not only resilience but also a profound sense of harmony with their environment. Life moved slowly, deliberately, and attentively, each moment a measured response to the land's enduring, silent, and beautiful authority. In the frozen frontier, survival hinged on the delicate balance between exposure and protection. Clothing was far more than ornament or comfort. It was a literal extension of the body, a critical interface between human flesh and the relentless cold. Settlers approached the task of dressing with care and intention, layering furs, hides, and woven fabrics to trap warmth while allowing movement. Each layer was chosen deliberately. Thick outer garments to shield against wind, insulating layers to retain heat, and inner fabrics to draw moisture away from the skin. Every stitch, every seam, and every knot reflected the hard-earned knowledge that even the smallest lapse could bring frostbite, numbness, or exhaustion. The cold itself was constant and insistent, pressing against skin and bone with quiet persistence. Hands and feet were the first to betray vulnerability, stiffening and losing sensation with alarming speed. Fingers grew rigid as if encased in ice, toes ached within boots or wrappings, and cheeks burned and cracked under the bite of wind. Settlers developed habits to counter these effects, moving fingers and toes regularly, adjusting layers, rubbing extremities with gloved hands, and taking deliberate, measured steps to maintain circulation. Awareness of the body's signals became essential, a constant practice of observation and intervention that demanded patience, mindfulness, and respect for the limits of flesh in a harsh climate. Gloves, mittens, and layered footwear were carefully maintained. Fur linings were brushed and repositioned to maximize insulation. Leather and cloth layers were treated with fats or oils to repel moisture. Bindings were tightened or loosened to balance warmth and circulation. Settlers often paused to examine these details, feeling the subtle differences in texture, temperature, and fit. Even the act of adjusting a glove or tightening a boot became deliberate, a small ritual in which focus, touch, and patience combined to safeguard health and mobility. Neglect, even for a few moments, could have consequences measured in pain, frostbite, or reduced capacity to labor in the cold. Skin care, though rudimentary by modern standards, was vital. Settlers learned to protect exposed areas with natural oils or greases, rubbing them gently into cheeks, noses, and lips to stave off cracking. Minor injuries, scrapes, chafing, or frost nicks, were treated immediately with cloth, salve, or warmth to prevent worsening. The act of attending to one's body became an intimate, ongoing dialogue, a recognition that survival demanded attention to small, often invisible details. Touch became a measure of life, a means of understanding how the cold was interacting with flesh, and an essential form of communication between human and environment. Layering itself became an art of balance and adaptation. Clothing had to insulate without restricting movement. It needed to trap air but avoid dampness. It had to be sturdy yet flexible. Settlers often experimented with arrangements, shifting layers depending on activity, temperature, and wind. A hunter might add an outer fur for movement across open snowfields, then remove it during labor inside the shelter. A child might require additional padding during play or observation of work. This constant adjustment fostered mindfulness, teaching inhabitants to notice subtle changes in weather, body response, and activity level, and to respond with deliberate care. Heat was precious and fleeting. Settlers learned to preserve warmth not only with clothing but through posture, movement, and proximity to fires or sheltered spaces. Crouching close to hearths, huddling together, and using insulation such as snow or turf to block drafts became daily habits. Even rest was carefully managed. Blankets, furs, and bedding were arranged to maximize heat retention, while the body itself learned to conserve energy, slowing metabolism and movement during long nights. Every action, no matter how small, became an exercise in the quiet negotiation between body and environment. The sensory experience of clothing and warmth was profound. Fabrics and furs pressed against skin, textures varying from coarse to soft, each carrying subtle cues about insulation and protection. The smell of tanned hides, mixed with smoke and faint earthiness, filled shelters, grounding inhabitants in a world both tactile and aromatic. Breath mingled with air warmed by bodies and fires, creating a microclimate that contrasted sharply with the biting cold outside. Settlers became attuned to these sensations, learning to recognize the comfort of adequate protection and the warning signals of exposure. Emotionally, The constant negotiation with cold and clothing fostered resilience and attentiveness. Humility was reinforced as humans were reminded daily of their vulnerability. Yet there was also satisfaction in mastery, however modest, of survival techniques. Each layer correctly donned, each adjustment made at the right moment became a small victory, a quiet affirmation of skill, patience, and presence. The intimate relationship between skin, clothing, and the environment shaped not only the body but the mind, cultivating a slow, deliberate rhythm of care, awareness, and adaptation. Through careful layering, maintenance, and attentiveness, settlers achieved more than survival. They cultivated a form of harmony with the frozen world. Clothing became a language, a tool, and a companion, translating the relentless cold into manageable experience. In learning its lessons, humans discovered the quiet dignity of measured, mindful life. Hands warmed, feet protected, bodies preserved, and spirits strengthened against the persistent, whispering authority of ice, wind, and frost. The fight for warmth was constant, unending, and quiet, yet it fostered a rhythm of deliberate attention and survival that became the heartbeat of life in the frozen frontier. In the frozen frontier, labor was not marked by noise or haste but by a profound meditative stillness. Every action was deliberate, measured, and responsive to the environment, as if the very wind and snow demanded restraint. The clamor of ordinary life, so familiar in warmer, more crowded regions, was replaced here by quiet exertion. The soft scrape of wood under a knife, the faint thump of a stone settling into place, the gentle crunch of snow under booted feet. Even the simplest tasks required attentiveness, patience, and an awareness of the land's subtle feedback. Work was less an imposition on the environment than a careful negotiation with it, a silent dialogue in which humans moved in harmony with the rhythms of ice, frost, and wind. The day often began at the faintest hint of light. Settlers moved slowly from sleeping areas to hearths, carrying tools and supplies with measured care. Every motion was considered, bending to lift a log, scraping frost from a surface, adjusting the angle of a blade. Sudden movements were avoided. In a world where the cold could strike with subtle precision, each gesture had consequences. The crunch of snow underfoot, the rasp of a saw against timber, the barely audible thud of a stone settling into place. These became the markers of time and effort, the cadence of life in a land ruled by restraint. Tasks were performed with careful observation of materials. Wood was examined for density, moisture content, and grain direction before being split or carved. Ice was tested for thickness and stability before being crossed or harvested. Even small tools were treated with precision, cleaned, sharpened, and maintained with methodical attention. Settlers learned to anticipate the response of each material to the environment, predicting how frost would alter wood or how snow would shift under weight. Work was a dialogue with the natural world, each task a conversation conducted in silence, observation, and deliberate action. Hunting, gathering, and preparation of food were performed with similar quietude. The snap of a branch or the sudden crush of snow could send prey fleeing, so movements were slow and measured, guided by the careful observation of tracks and shadows. Tools were handled with precision, fingers numbed yet dexterous under layers of protection. Even domestic tasks, such as preparing firewood, cleaning fish, or repairing clothing, were approached with patience and a steady rhythm. The quiet focus of these actions cultivated mindfulness, turning labor into a meditation on survival and awareness. Silence extended beyond individual work to encompass communal effort. When settlers labored together, cooperation often relied on gestures, glances, and subtle cues rather than speech. Words carried too far in the open air. An unnecessary sound could disturb animals, alert predators, or simply dissipate precious warmth. Each person's movements complemented the others, creating a rhythm in which effort was synchronized with observation and restraint. Work became both personal and shared, an expression of skill, discipline, and mutual understanding, reinforced by the quiet dominance of the environment. Attention to detail defined the quality of work. A misaligned log, a poorly sharpened blade, or an improperly insulated wall could compromise warmth and safety. Settlers developed a patient, almost ritualistic approach to tasks, performing them repeatedly until every joint, seam, and surface was secure. This careful repetition was not merely functional. It cultivated steadiness, focus, and a profound respect for the land's subtle authority. Every completed task, however modest, was a testament to endurance and meticulous observation. Even time itself was felt through the rhythm of work. The passage of hours was marked by the shifting light, the quiet accumulation of snow, or the subtle sounds of ice and wind. Settlers learned to pace themselves in alignment with these natural cues, allowing labor to unfold in harmony with environmental cycles. Fatigue was met with careful pauses, warm fires, or brief shelter, always measured to conserve energy and prevent injury. Work was never rushed. Haste could undo effort and invite danger. Each action, deliberate and intentional, became part of a larger pattern of survival, patience, and mindful engagement. Emotionally, the near silence of labor fostered a contemplative state. Settlers developed awareness of both self and surroundings, attuning senses to the subtle shifts in weather, temperature, and terrain. There was satisfaction in completion, not in speed, and quiet pride in tasks executed with precision. The rhythm of work reinforced patience, resilience, and focus, embedding within each individual a deep understanding of life in the frozen frontier, slow, deliberate, and profoundly connected to the land. By performing work in near silence, settlers learned to listen not only to the environment but also to themselves. Every movement, every gesture, every sound or lack thereof became a lesson in attentiveness, endurance, and humility. Through these daily rituals, human effort harmonized with the frozen world, shaping a life defined not by haste or noise, but by deliberate, thoughtful engagement. In this quiet, measured labor, settlers discovered a rhythm that was both sustaining and meditative, the heartbeat of survival in a land that demanded patience, respect, and gentle, persistent attention. In the frozen frontier, isolation was not merely a circumstance, it was the very fabric of life. The vast expanse of snow and ice separated homes, families, and settlements by distances that, in warmer climates, might have been considered minimal. Yet here, every step across the windswept fields, every trek along frozen rivers, required careful attention, patience, and endurance. It was in this environment, stark and relentless, that the bonds of community were forged, quietly and deliberately, through shared survival, mutual care, and the slow rhythm of daily life. Early settlers discovered quickly that survival could not be achieved in solitude. The relentless cold, the capricious storms, and the scarcity of resources demanded cooperation. Neighbors learned to share knowledge, which slopes were safest to traverse, where water sources could be found beneath frozen rivers, and which techniques for preserving food or maintaining shelter were most reliable. Advice was exchanged quietly, often through demonstration rather than speech, a teaching of action rather than words. These interactions were subtle, meditative, and deeply imbued with trust, forming bonds that were stronger than any casual friendship, because they were forged in the fires of necessity and the quiet authority of the land. Mutual assistance extended to daily tasks, each chore shared according to skill and endurance. Firewood, essential for warmth, was gathered collectively, with groups moving in measured synchrony through forests and along frozen banks. While one carried logs, another cleared snow or reinforced paths, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic crunch of boots in snow or the occasional shift of heavy timber. Each action complemented the next, creating a delicate choreography of labor that allowed survival in an environment that demanded constant vigilance. The process of working together, step by deliberate step, reinforced interdependence and cultivated subtle forms of communication, glances, gestures, and shared timing, that strengthened the community's cohesion. Food became another medium through which connections deepened. When hunting or foraging yielded abundance, provisions were distributed thoughtfully. The act of sharing was never casual. It was deliberate and reflective, a recognition of the precarious balance between human need and environmental generosity. Settlers measured portions, ensuring that the weakest or most vulnerable members of the community were cared for, while also teaching responsibility and prudence. Each shared meal carried layers of meaning: sustenance, trust, and a quiet acknowledgement that in this world no one could endure alone. Even leisure and contemplation were imbued with communal significance. During long nights, settlers gathered around hearths, the low flicker of flames casting shadows against walls of stone, timber, and packed earth. Stories were exchanged, sometimes recounting the land's dangers, sometimes chronicling past journeys or ancestral knowledge. Conversation was slow, deliberate, and steeped in observation of the present moment. The rhythm of the wind outside, the crackle of firewood, the warmth of shared presence. Children learned from elders not only the practical skills necessary for survival, but also the values of attentiveness, patience, and respect for both the environment and one another. Bonds were nurtured through repetition, quiet teaching, and the steady passage of time in shared space. Trust became the cornerstone of communal life. Settlers relied on each other for safety during storms, for guidance across treacherous terrain, and for assistance in moments of illness or injury. Small acts, a helping hand in clearing snow, a shared garment or layer of fur, an extra ration of food, took on extraordinary weight, reinforcing the understanding that survival was a collective endeavor. Silence itself became a form of communication, the unspoken coordination of timing, effort, and care, guiding each individual while strengthening the community as a whole. Observation and reflection, hallmarks of frontier life, were also communal experiences. People noticed the subtle changes in each other's health, energy, and morale. A slowed step might indicate fatigue or illness. A careful movement could signify attention to detail or stress. These small details were observed not with judgment but with attentive care, informing decisions about work, food distribution, and social interaction. In this way, the community became a living, responsive organism, each member attuned to the needs and rhythms of the others, and all united in the quiet pursuit of endurance. Emotionally, these bonds tempered the harshness of isolation. The vast white landscapes, the long nights, and the ceaseless cold could have fostered despair. Yet the presence of others, carefully observed, quietly supportive, provided a buffer against desolation. Human connection, subtle and deliberate, became a source of warmth alongside the hearth and the layers of fur. The shared rituals of life, gathering wood, preparing meals, maintaining shelters, or simply observing the rhythms of day and night, imbued life with meaning, reinforcing the sense that even in the remotest and most challenging conditions, people were not entirely alone. Community life in the frontier also cultivated patience, empathy, and a profound awareness of interdependence. Settlers learned that survival was not a solitary triumph but a shared achievement. Mistakes, oversights, or lapses in care affected not only the individual but all who depended on them. Consequently, every action, however small, was conducted with awareness of its effect on others, fostering responsibility, attentiveness, and restraint. These qualities, cultivated slowly over time, became woven into the very fabric of frontier life, shaping character as surely as the land shaped the body. Over months and years, as families and neighbors worked, observed, and endured together, a rhythm emerged. Days of shared labor, evenings of quiet reflection, nights of vulnerability and watchfulness, and the slow, relentless cycles of cold and light created a bond both practical and profound. These bonds were not ostentatious. They were subtle, meditative, and enduring. They formed the social bedrock of the frozen frontier, allowing humans to inhabit a world that demanded respect, patience, and quiet attentiveness. In the end, it was these relationships that made life in the frozen frontier possible. The land remained vast, indifferent, and challenging, Yet within the circle of shared labor, care, and observation, settlers found warmth, trust, and continuity. The community became an extension of the land itself, deliberate, patient, resilient, and attuned to the subtle rhythms of existence. It was through these bonds, forged slowly under the weight of snow, wind, and cold, that humans endured, thrived, and wove meaning into the quiet, meditative cadence of life in frozen frontier communities. Here, survival was never solitary. It was a shared, reflective, and enduring experience, a testament to the resilience of both people and the bonds that tethered them to each other in a world of ice and silence.